The Journal, 31st of August 2023, Why China, Russia, and the United States do not have to be Africa's only options. Africa intends to declare the high-interest Chinese loans null and void at the appropriate moment, with no intention of repaying them. A third of a century after the conclusion of the Cold War, the global order is changing fundamentally. This shift is centered on the US government's hegemony being questioned. The key leaders of this challenge are China and Russia, dissatisfied with Washington's diplomatic actions on the international scene. The Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022 is the most recent instance of this uprising. The war was a proxy for a rebellion by Russia and the undemocratic west against the United States, according to US-British foreign affairs expert Fiona Hill. As part of this realignment, the continent of Africa is a clear contender to draw the attention of the major powers. And for a minimum of 4 reasons. First, with almost 28% of all votes cast in the General Assembly, it is the largest regional group at the UN. In addition, it contains vital raw materials that are unique to the continent. Third, it has significant sea lanes for trade, especially with East Africa. Ultimately, the continent has the youngest population that is expanding the fastest, and by 2030, it will account for almost 42% of all youth worldwide. As a geopolitical expert, I have studied the continent's trading connections with the leading nations. Based on my findings, I concluded that Africa would benefit more from remaining neutral than taking a side. The causes of Africa's rapid growth are about to end. The importance of Africa to the UN General Assembly cannot be overstated. Occasionally, the continent finds it difficult to react in a coordinated way. However, he could cast a synchronized vote in the past, which was essential. The most notable example is the resolution that replaced Taiwan and admitted mainland China to the UN in 1971. There were 76 votes in favor of this resolution, with 27 votes from member states in Africa. Having this sizable coalition of nations on your side makes a big difference in the UN regarding passing or rejecting resolutions. Due to the veto power of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, China, France, Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, the UN General Assembly assumed control after the UN Security Council broke down. The UNGA follows the principle of one member, one vote. The General Assembly's votes are primarily symbolic. However, they serve as a valuable gauge of the global community's stance and represent a potent moral tool for any dominant nation. Naturally, Africa's abundance of resources is another main draw. This wealth, which is becoming more and more significant, is crucial to the transition to alternate, renewable, and non-renewable energy sources as well as to the production of goods resulting from technological innovation, like the Democratic Republic of the Congo's cobalt, which is needed, among other things, to make device screens. The DRC is the top producer of this essential mineral in the world. At the same time, as the nations look to diversify their sources of natural gas from Russia and fossil fuels, the oil deposits of Algeria, Angola, and Nigeria will become more significant. Trade routes are another. 10% of global trade is handled annually via the Red Sea route, which crosses northeast Africa and connects it to the Indian Ocean. The Red Sea route goes through nations like Somalia and Eritrea. Russia has been actively courting these two nations. For its part, China selected this route as a component of the Maritime Silk Road program. Its goal is to make the port infrastructures of the nations that border the Indian Ocean stronger. Lastly, the fastest increase in the young population is seen in Africa. Identifying potential customers, particularly in technology and education, will be crucial. Because their populations are aging more quickly than the world average, the United States and Europe are likewise keen to utilize this human potential. Many people consider Africa to be the source of entering migrant flows. Links between Africa and the major powers. In 2022, the continent brought in $30.6 billion in imports and $43.1 billion in exports to the U.S. In contrast, in the same year, China imported $117.5 billion worth of goods from Africa and exported $164.1 billion to the continent. China accounts for 17.7% of Africa's $661.4 billion in exports, with the United States accounting for 6.5%. As a result, even if the combined strength of the 27-nation European Union Economic Group continues to lead, China, which has seen tremendous expansion over the last 50 years, is now Africa's top trading partner. Decades of diplomatic and commercial attempts to woo the continent through the Forum on Sino-African Cooperation have resulted in ties between China and the mainland. China wants to oppose the United States, which is one of the reasons behind these initiatives. Supporting its economy has been the other driving motivation, considering Africa's unrealized potential. Russia has chosen an alternative approach. Because of its small trade with the mainland, estimated at $18 billion in 2021, it instead looked to work with the US in security, drawing on an idealized version of Soviet history. The African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, which is set to expire in 2025, is the primary tool at Washington's disposal to promote commerce and positive conduct in Africa. It's a system that provides leverage, but the evidence clarifies that trade is declining. The big image hides some subtleties. Some African states have stronger ties to the US than others. For instance, there is an American military facility in Djibouti, together with other states, but not Russia just yet. Additionally, South Africa, Nigeria, and Egypt are among the principal recipients of US direct investment. On the other hand, Eritrea does not appear to be trying to win over the United States of America. Eritrea was the only African state to vote openly against the UN General Assembly's condemnation of Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine. Except for this exceptional instance, the world is highly interconnected, even between rival superpowers. Despite their trade spat, the US and China are finding it difficult to separate from one another, as evidenced by the record-breaking levels of bilateral trade that they reached last year. The US may try to bring in outside parties in light of the relative reduction in commerce between the US and Africa. They might be able to influence Africa through the EU. One example of this is the Huawei scandal. Several allies were successfully persuaded to terminate ties with the Chinese tech behemoth by the United States. The two largest holders of African assets by value are the United Kingdom, $65 billion, and France, $60 billion, according to UNCTAD data. Africa as a third party may suffer if these and other European states attempt to get rid of risk from China. This can be an excessive pressure on the continent to respond specifically to Russia and China's product dumping. China feels that picking sides is not the best action because they are trying to find product markets. Recent studies, mine included, on the trade rivalry between China and the United States in Africa demonstrate the fallacy of the widely held belief that tiny nations must pick sides in divisive international environments. Trading with as many partners as possible is ideal for Africa. As we've seen, the primary rivals themselves engage in record-breaking commerce with one another. After the war against Ukraine, trade between Europe and Russia has not stopped. In fact, it has even increased in certain areas. Thus, the continent can afford to maintain its neutrality. He cannot afford to take a stand and forego collaboration. Africa will not need to take a side in the upcoming multipolar order. One can lay out all of the possibilities. The discussion,